you're like me, you have a handful of items that have been hanging around your shop for many years that need restoring. Now, these items could be something like a family heirloom that's been passed down through the generations, or it could be something you found at a flea market or a garage sale or on Craigslist. And if you're like me, you've been staring at these items for many years, thinking about how cool it would be to see these things finally restored and brought back to their former glory. Well, today is the day. Today is the day that I am going to start the rebuild process of this Remington 1898 double-barreled shotgun. This shotgun is special to me because it was my great-great-grandfather's. And this shotgun has been in our family ever since. And you can see it's all there, but it has some parts that are damaged beyond repair, specifically the buttstock. You can see the wood that is rotted away, specifically between the two hammers that sandwich it together. This is an integrated stock, so the stock is part of the support that holds all the firing assembly together. So the hammers, the trigger assembly, it's all one piece when it's all joined together. So this buttstock is going to need to be replaced. What we have done is I bought a replica buttstock, and it's about probably 80% of the way there. The last 20% is up to me. I'm going to have to get out the chisels, I'm going to use the milling machine, and I will be doing so much sanding and filing. There is a ton of sanding that goes into this project. But that's part of the fun of it. That's part of the joys of working with wood. You have to sneak up on it. You have to get those tolerances, as close as possible while sneaking up on it. Because I can't go back like I can with a piece of metal and grab the welder and add on some more metal if I take too much off. I have one shot to get this right. And I want to do it right. I want to do this as close to the original as possible because I want to pay homage to those craftsmen that put this gun together so many years ago. Now, this gun was mass produced, and they had a jig that would get the cuts perfectly the same all the time in the stock. It was probably a router jig, maybe some sort of milling machine style jig, but there was a jig nonetheless that allowed you to get the repeatability in these stocks because they had to churn these guns out. Now for me, you see me pointing right there to that B shape that's cut out in the front. I have to cut that into this new stock along with taking down some of the material. That's going to be a challenge because the only flat spot I have is right there on the sides where my fingers are grabbing. That flat spot is where the hammers line up against it. Other than that, I don't have another flat spot to grab this gun with the vise and set it up in the mill to have it as a repeatable positioning, if that makes sense. So as I'm trying to sneak up on this stock here, trying to sneak up on these cuts and make sure that I don't make it either too loose on one side and have it hanging out like you see there, or have it too loose on the other side and leaving a gap at the top, I'm going to have to reset this up in this vise of the milling machine every time to try to get it just right. And so that'll be a little bit of a challenge, but it's part of the joys of doing this. I want to make sure that I'm doing this right, and I only get one shot to do this. Wood is really not as forgiving as metal. Now, this stock came from Cottage Craft Woodworks. I will put a link in the description of this video. And this stock cost $220 plus shipping. And that's a decent amount of money for a gun that's questionable if it would be even worth that amount of money. But the sentimental value and the family heritage and the history part of it, I felt that it was worth it. So I've saved up some money over the time, and I figured, hey, let's pull the trigger and let's buy this. So let's get into the milling process of this. I tried to use the mill on this as much as I could because the mill does not make, well, let me back up. It will make mistakes. It does not. If I'm using it correctly, I can sneak up on a cut and I don't have to worry about jamming a chisel in too deep or drilling out something by hand and, having it angled the wrong way. Everything is very precise with the milling machine. So the issue lies in how am I going to get it to be held in there so it does not move and does not damage the stock. I have a Kurt vise that I can flip on its side, as you can see here. So we flipped it on its side. I use these clamps right there to clamp it down the table, and we're going to swing the head over and extend it all the way out, and this is going to allow me to hang the stock straight up and down right next to the knee. Now, it's okay to have the mill at full extension like this and be working off of just one side, because cutting wood requires very little rigidity. It's not like cutting steel. So you can see right there, I have my wooden soft jaws. I'm able to set in the stock, and here it is. This is how the milling cutter sees it. And I'm able to, essentially what I did is I put the old stock in there and eyeballed it and figured out where in space that stock sat out. And then I put this new stock in here and did the same thing. The reason I know that it's being held straight is where those jaws of the vise are touching. It is a flat surface. It's been machined from the factory like that, both on the old stock and on this replica stock. So what I'm doing right here is I am carving out the P, this upside down P, I'll call it. And what this does is this allows the spring that allows you to kick open your breech. This is where that spring sits. So this is just, they just need to remove that material so that the spring can operate unimpededly. So we're just going in here and I'm making really slow, really fine cuts. This is sped up, I think, tenfold. Like I have the hand cranks going here. I'm not using the power feed. I am going as slow as possible here because I don't want to screw this up. You can see they have the nice CNC'd material there from the factory. You can see how it's flat. That's how I was holding it, is in the vise, was with those flat sides right there from the factory. Those are the only true flat sides that this stock has. And you can see right there I have to do quite a bit of material removal so that tongue will sit back all the way. Well, I also have to make sure that I'm keeping this angle in there between the barrel and the hammer mechanism perfectly straight, because if I don't, it won't sit right. So what I'm pointing to with the ruler right there, that is where I'm having to make sure that those gaps get closed up evenly, because if they're if they close up at the bottom or the top first, then you'll have a gap at the other end, and we don't want that. So we're just milling this down, this material here. Now that I've made my pattern in the wood, I'm using the mill to remove the bulk of the material to allow that front of the buttstock and the back end of the shotgun to mate up to each other nice and close. For the last portion here, I'm using a chisel. This is just allowing me to take off really fine amounts of material without less than what I need to take off with the milling machine. And I can get a pretty close tolerances with this. And it keeps everything on the flat plane. So you can see right here, this is what it looked like. This is just a whole bunch of me going back and forth and back and forth, taking that buttstock back to the gun and making sure that lines up just perfectly, because you don't want to take off too much material, because, like I said, this is wood. I can't just go over the welder and spray some more wood on there like you can with metal. Now that we've got this thing where we want it, this is what the finished product looks like. You have that B groove cut in there, or upside down P, depending on how you're looking at it, and that is where the spring that opens up the breech is going to sit. You can see the new stock there is wider than the old stock. That is because I have not done the sanding yet to bring it down to the correct nominal dimensions. They ship these things to you in a lot thicker, or there's more material than what you need. So part of the machining process, or woodworking process we'll call it for you, is you have to take off material on the top, the bottom, the sides, the front, the back, the whole thing. And they do that on purpose because they want you to have a perfect fit. And right there you can see we have what I'm going to call a pretty darn good fit. You can see that the wood sits up higher than the tongue of the gun on the back there, and it sits up sits down a little bit lower than the bottom of the gun. So all that material is going to come off. But the important part right there is where the wood meets the gun. It is nice and tight. There's no light coming in from the backside indicating that I have a gap on either the top end or the bottom end. That was my goal. That's why this took so long, is trying to sneak up on that. Now, we're on to the next chapter here of this process, which is the buttstock. So here's the piece of plastic that came off the old one, and it's sitting on the new one here, and you can see there is a decent amount of material hanging off of both sides. So what we have to do is we have to remove this material equally on both sides, the same amount during the process on both sides of the stock. So what that means, I don't want to get a wave action going down the length of the stock. And this becomes kind of problematic when you're doing it with what I'm going to be doing, which is a belt sander. I find that the belt sander worked the best for this operation because it allowed me to remove the material quickly, but maintain the same material removal rate down the whole length of the stock. So what I started off with here is, I think I had there's a 60 grit belt there. And this is just your typical 1 inch by 30 inch, I believe, belt sander. And it works great for stuff like this. A 60 grit belt will actually take off quite a bit of material. And you're just doing the same amount on both sides. That's the big thing to remember, is I'm just, going back and forth both sides, just feathering it in, and then comparing it to the old one, and that plastic plate there, to make sure that I get just the right amount of material removed, so it's everything lines up the way it should. Now this is the part where it gets really interesting. Now we're drilling holes. This is the holes that hold the hammer assembly together, and it allows the bolts to go through the entire stock there. The way I figured out where the holes need to be is I took calipers and measured on the old stock from the front to the back, and there's a little bit of comparing and setting them on top of each other because there's enough missing wood that had rotted away that in some cases I wasn't able to do that. So this is a little bit of just trying to get as close as possible. And that's the problem when you're working with a piece of material that is rotted away and you don't have the complete set there to make a pattern off of. Now what you see me doing right here, this is actually cutting the groove out for the trigger guard. So you see the trigger guard goes further back than what they routed out from the factory with this replica stock here. And what I found works best for cutting this out, I should say, is just taking my milling machine and using a cutter. That's just a little bit narrower than the trigger guard it was. And yes, I'm using the quill coming up and down with it, so it's not a perfectly flat cut, but I'm looking more for the sides to be perfectly not chiseled, I should say. I want a nice straight cut on both sides where that trigger assembly is going to sit, because I can come in later with a file, sandpaper, chisels, and flatten out the bottom. Making a bottom flat is easy. It's the sides where it mates up to that trigger assembly where it's a little bit challenging. So it's just a whole bunch of back and forth, going slowly with it. And not only am I having to control the table speed, which the auto feed is doing that, but I am using that quill to drop that cutter down in there to get the right height. So that worked pretty good. You'll see it here in a second. Right here, we're just putting in the holes, or marking out where the holes are going to go for the top bolts. And this is where it gets challenging too, is because there is an angle to this. So if that buttstock is not sitting at the perfect angle, then I'm not going to get it right. This hole, I believe, was actually from the factory, and it was not sitting correctly. So what I had to do is take a milling cutter, mill it out, and then take a drill bit, drill it out, and then you see me doing the final augering it out, we'll say, with a file, trying to make it so it lines up. And then for figuring out for drilling where we're going to drill here for the buttstock cover, I just use a center finder punch and that bungee cord there to hold it on, and that's what we used. It worked actually really well. And then just come in there with a little drill, put my drill in for the holes, and then we're going to try screwing it in with the original hardware. The screws that held this on were pretty rusty. They were slotted screws, and what I'm doing right there is I'm taking paste wax, and I am basically going through and trying to use it as a lubricant, and we're going back and forth trying to get those threads to cut in almost like a tap would in a hole, the same effect into this wood. So I'm just going back and forth, allowing those threads to cut into the wood because they're rusty screws. I don't want to put a ton of torque on them and potentially break them off in this. This is an oak handle here, so it is a hardwood, and I tried to drill that out to where it was just under the screw size, but still it was a tight fit, and so having that wax on there, the paste wax, really did help. And you can see it worked pretty well for that application. Now we're giving this just a liberal coating of boiled linseed oil. The original stock had, I believe it was some sort of varnish, and I want to get this thing close. The boiled linseed oil would be time period specific. It's how they would have treated stocks back then too. I didn't have a varnish that would readily on hand, and I figured the boiled linseed oil would be good enough for this. I want to try to keep this as time period specific as possible. And if I want to come back later and make any modifications, like cutting in a checkering that was original to the this gun, then I can do that. And the boiled linseed oil is a little bit easier, I believe, to come and touch up any work that I do. Now this is the fun part. This is the part that I've been waiting months to do. I know this video is 24 minutes long, but this is literally months of work condensed down into this video. And this is the part where I get to put this thing back together. And it is kind of surreal to me because this thing has been broken my whole life. I've been looking at this thing hanging on a wall or sitting in a corner of my dad's shop, and it's always been like this thing that's just been broken, and I'm finally getting to put it back together in a usable state. And granted, usable is a pretty loose term, but it's going back together, and that is really cool to me. I got to help restore this thing and capture a piece of our family's history, something that's been in our family a long time, and I'm really happy about this. Okay, I think we are at a stopping point here with this build, and here is the finished result. So, recap, this is a replica stock that I got. This is the old stock that had broken up along the spine here, and as you can tell, color, this one has a little bit more gloss. This has a matte finish here because I used boiled linseed oil, but overall functionality, I think it's perfect. It's going to work for what we need. And it's the same, they could have used these finishes back when this thing was being produced. Obviously, they use a little bit higher gloss here, but for right now, I got a protectant on here, and I can come back at a later date and put on a higher gloss finish if I'd like. Fit and finish, it's a replica stock. It's not as tight of tolerances as this one is. This stock right here was done on a jig, and they built thousands of these, and they were true craftsmen back in the day that were able to get the super tight tolerances. I mean, this is done, there's some sort of jig and assuming a milling machine or a powered router that's on some sort of jig that got all these cuts in here just perfectly. This stock that you see here, this replica stock, it came with the majority of this material removed, but I still had to do quite a bit of removing by chisel work, using a Bridgeport milling machine to get the final size so this thing would all fit in here perfectly. And it's not a perfect fit. That is the hard part with wood, is you can take off too much wood, but you can't put back on. Where like metal, if I take too much metal off, I can grab the welder and I can add more metal to it. So it's not perfect. I have gaps here, and when I look at this, my OCD brain says, okay, I wish I had gotten that. Just a little bit tighter tolerances. But, for a replica stock, and this is my first time ever doing any sort of gunsmithing work. I don't think you call this gunsmithing. We'll call this woodworking to joining to metal work. For this being my first time, I'm pretty happy with how this came out. This is I would say a pretty easy process. Having a milling machine made it a lot easier, and it's just time intensive. This took a lot of time for me to come out here in the shop when I had some spare time and come out for 5, 10, 15 minutes and grab a chisel, grab some sandpaper, and just finesse and try to feather my way to getting as close to tolerance as I could. And I got close, but I didn't hit the mark. And something as simple as trying to get my holes lined up here. I used a center finding punch, got the center in here, but the geometry of how the screws, one comes down at an angle, one goes in, it pulled this whole plate down. Maybe, like I can feel it, but it's probably maybe 15 or 20 thousandths down. And I know that doesn't make a huge difference, but when you feel that little step off on the bottom and feel a little drop off at the top, it's just those little fit and finish things that I wish I had gotten a little bit closer on. So, yeah, this is a pretty straightforward build or rebuild. I don't know what you want to call it. But I'm happy with it. I have this thing secure enough in here that I feel it's safe to fire. So if I can find a time area appropriate load for this, so a very low powered gunpowder and the proper shell, because I believe that these were brass shells back in the day. I don't think they're the plastic ones that we're used to. My goal is to be able to let my dad shoot this. So this was his gun growing up. He got to go duck hunting with it, and it has been out of service because of this broken spine for well over half a century. So I think it'd be a real treat to be able to find a appropriate load for this and let him shoot this. He's not getting any younger, and I think it'll be a real treat. So that might be a future video, but for now, this is just a recap of getting this stock reinstalled here. You probably noticed during the rebuild video, trying to get this trigger to catch on the far side here, it's a little problematic. So I have to really kind of lean into it. And I'm still trying to just, it's a little bit of finesse. I have to get everything just tight. Because the two bars that stick out here, they were sprung out. And so there's a lot of little things that can throw this gun off just because of the design of it. So, but I have it to where both triggers will move. There is missing return spring on one of the triggers. It's not I'm currently looking for a replacement for that, but it's not a safety issue. It just keeps the trigger, pulls it back, so you're able to take another shot instead of having to manually move it back with your finger. So, yeah, overall, happy with the build, happy with how this came out, and yeah, this is a fun family heirloom project that has been talked about a lot in my family. Of, hey, do we want to put the time and money and have this thing rebuilt and get fireable again? So I'm glad I have the opportunity to get the stock here and be able to get this rebuilt, so this can be handed down to my kids, and hopefully my grandkids can get to shoot this. This is a piece of history. So anyways, hopefully you guys enjoyed the video, and thank you guys for watching. Have a wonderful day.